welcome everybody on this. I'm not sure about you guys, but I'm based in Rotterdam and the sun is really nice shining. We have been waiting months for this. But nevertheless, I'm very happy that you're all here. And today I will, as mentioned, I will start with an introduction on dependency injection in .NET Core. And later on, I will give a short introduction on CodeRush. You might see me do a couple of things during the dependency injection session, which is obviously done by CodeRush. So you'll get like a bit of a sneak peek. And then after the session, I'll dive a bit more into a couple of nice features with CodeRush. But for now, yeah, let's talk about dependency injection in .NET Core and why should you use it and how. And well, let's first, yeah, it's too bad that we're not face to face, so I can't see any fingers if I ask a question. But yeah, let's talk about what is dependency injection. Well, it is a design pattern which enables us to loosely couple different objects in our application. And that means it makes a bit more sense once I start showing code. But yeah, it is something that enables us to build different parts and put them all together in the end and have a working application. And it separates the creation of dependencies from the behavior of an object. And this sounds a bit abstract altogether, but I'll give you a practical example that makes more sense here. So let's first talk about a non-injected way, and I'll give you a picture, and that makes perfect sense. You see this light bulb here, this desk light, and I'm not talking about the power plug and the power cord, etc. It's just the light.
Hi, Dom.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I don't think you're sharing anything.
Didn't I share my screen already? I thought I did. Let's do that. That would be this screen. Hey, it stopped, but sharing it again. Okay. Is this okay?
Yeah, now I see your screen.
You see a desk light, right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Let me go back just now. Now I spoiled the surprise, but anyway. So I was talking about what is dependency injection. So if you look this up on the internet, you'll get a couple of bullet points and the most interesting things I've mentioned here. But let's give a practical example on dependency injection. So in a non-injected way, this desk light is a perfect example. And I'm not talking about the power cord and the power plug, but just the picture that you see here. And most important, this button. This button is integrated in the light. And that means that button will always be there. And yeah, that's just the whole thing that works together. If we would do this by using dependency injection, what will happen is we'll have this little store. I'll get to that a bit later. We have a light. In this case, it's on the ceiling. And I have a button. And that button and that light is somehow connected. And if I flip the button, the light goes on. It's like, yeah, the outcome is the same, but there is a very important thing here, because what I can do now, I could attach another light on that same button. And so the button is somehow, yeah, decoupled from that light. But I could also put in another lamp which even looks differently. Yeah, I'll run to that store that is on the right bottom. I'll get another light, I'll put it up, and it runs as well. And even I could go to that same store again and get a better looking button without interfering with the lights. I mean, I didn't touch the lights to replace the button. And I can put an extra light in and don't touch the button. Obviously, I need to touch it to test it, but you get the idea, I hope. So why would we use dependency injection in software development? Well, we can obviously reuse classes and objects across different parts of the applications. And another thing is that because of this design pattern, different portions of an application can be developed independently and in parallel. So suppose you have this one team that's working on the front end, and you've got this other team working on the back end. The front end can take like a dummy thing which has data, and it can build the UI on it, and then as long as the backend is the same interfaces and stuff, the backend team can develop that as well. And once everything is built on those sites, you can put it together and replace that dummy thing with the real data, the real backend. Yeah, so that's quite a nice advantage. And another thing is that you should be able to set up unit testable portions of code, and that obviously improves the quality of your product. So there are a bunch of dependency injection frameworks out there, and they all have a couple of things in common. And there is a container/injector that's typically glued together, and you could actually compare this with that little store that I put on the previous slide. That would be the container. It has all the stuff available, ready to use, or if you need something, it will create something for you, and it will give it to you. Just like the store. Then you'll have a list of service registrations that are bound to that container. And those are the services, so the portions of code that you would require at certain stages. And this all might seem still a bit abstract, but once we go into the code, it'll make more sense. And then there is the client. And that is your code, requesting certain functionality from the container. If we would put up a small little diagram, well, we have the injector, we have a bunch of services, and we have a client. And you could typically say, like, suppose you're at home and you would say to your wife, or maybe you talk to your Alexa speaker, I don't know, whatever, give me something to drink, and you'll get the drink. So you would be the client, you'll ask your drink, in this case to the injector, and that drink would be either service A or B. So that is in a nutshell how it works. Then there are a couple of other things, and that is obviously that with the introduction of .NET Core, the team, the .NET Core team decided to implement their own dependency injection framework right into .NET Core. And the other frameworks which are already out there for years, like, well, there are a couple of really big ones. Obviously, the cool thing with this is it is quite simple, it is effective, and it is right into .NET Core, so you don't need any dependencies whatsoever. So that's nice. This dependency injection in .NET Core works with 3 levels of service lifetime. So you might wonder, what is that? Well, I'll touch that in just a couple of minutes. The initialization and the registration of those services is done in the startup configure services method. Well, and once we get into .NET, I'll show you some of the code, and then there might be a couple of things in the startup file which now hopefully start to make sense to you, because .NET Core is fully built upon this DI framework. And what is also important is that the registration is type-based. Yeah, and one of the last things, but you can decide for yourself. I mean, if you want to configure if you want to build your own services and you want to use DI on your own code, you could actually write a number of extension methods to make it easy to register those services. And so let's go to Visual Studio and see what I mean with dependency injection, set up the service, etc., and do something with it. And then we'll get back to the slide to talk a bit more about it. So right here, I've already set up a small application, and this is just a Razor page project. I'll run it so you'll see it has a page. That opened obviously on my wrong screen, but this is typically just a file new experience. Nothing exciting here. Well, as I mentioned, services are registered in the startup configure services method. And here, what you'll see is that there are a couple of extension methods that come with the .NET that inject certain functionality into this configure certain functionality into the configurator in a container, so we can use that. And in this case, a number of things are being set up to support routing, authorization, etc., etc. But we're going to do something ourselves as well. Yeah, so if we would like to register a service, we should first build a service. Yeah, so let's do that. And for that, I have prepared just a tiny bit of code. In this case, let me make the screen slightly bigger. I hope it's all readable now. I have this Razor page. And what I've done, this is just the default page. I have created a property test data, and I've put some stuff in there. And what I next did in the index.cscml, I'm just pasting in that code. What I've also done is I have created a file which holds my sample services. And I have defined an interface in this case, which is called the iString modifier service, because this interface is going to be used to register a certain service. We're going to transform that code that was in that property by using dependency injection. It is a simple but effective example on how this works. So in this case, what I'll do, I'll create my service, and this service is just a regular class. And so I'll do uppercase service is what I'm calling it. And in this case, I will implement that interface. In this case, I will not need the constructor, so I can remove that, and it starts complaining about the fact that I didn't implement this interface. So this interface only has one method, which is the transform method. And what I'll do, I'll return the value to uppercase. And so a very simple surface, and this is how this looks. And if we have some time, I can show you some more advanced services or examples. But this is my service. What I now need to do is I need to register that service to the container. And that's being done in the startup file. So I go to the configure services, and I will use this. I'm gonna use this, and I will talk about this after we've seen this demo, what I do now is I will use the type registration, which is the string modifier service. And what I need to get back, so I need something which implements the iString modifier service. And in this case, I want it to be the uppercase service. Like this. For the rest, there is not really a lot that needs to be done. So the important thing here is, because this is a generic helper method that comes with .NET Core, I want something which implements the string modifier, but what I get is what I have specified here. But this is a type, this is not an instance. So this is why dependency injection is quite cool, because the container will check the life cycle of such a service. And this brings us back to the slide deck, because I do want to point that out before we run the application. Let's see. There are a couple of service lifetimes, and that is a singleton, it is scoped, and that's transient. And yes, you can also have services which depend on other services that are using dependency injection, but it should be it should be clear that a service cannot depend on a component with a smaller life cycle. So to get back to this service lifetime, a singleton registration means that there is one instance of that particular object in memory. And this is pretty much the same as before when we used singleton static variables, which are obviously quite cool, but they can be quite dangerous as well. This is the same effect. Only one instance of this object is being generated, and it will stay there till the end of the application. Then we also have the scoped. And the scoped lifetime is typically for the entire request being done. So for instance, if you would request a web page, there might be a couple of handlers or maybe a couple of filters in between. But from the first request till the end of that, fulfilling that request, there will be one instance for that particular request. And once it's done, the container will dispose that object itself. You don't need to do it. And the container will only dispose it when it's not a singleton and when nothing else is using that. That's something that's all be taken care of by the container. And then the last one is transient, and that's what I used in my example. Transient will create a new instance of that object all the time. Whenever you request something, you'll get a new instance. And yeah, the type of registration that you want to do depends on your services and on your application, and you have to think about how that's being done, right? So if I would now go back to my application here, so I have registered my service. In this case, I will get a new instance of this thing all the time. I now can start to use this. So how am I going to use this? Well, I'm going to the index page here, to the index code behind. And this brings us actually to the first and most used method of injection. And this is called constructor injection. And this index model class already has a constructor. And what you'll see is that this is already using dependency injection to request a logger for this particular page. And with constructor injection, I can just add the iString modifier service as a parameter in a constructor. I will call it SVC, which is my service. And what I can do now is let me declare a field with an initializer here, like this. And what I can do as last, because what will happen is as soon as this page is requested, the dependency injection will take care that there is an object being passed in this parameter. And now I have full access to that service. So what I'll do is I can say test data equals svc transform test data. Like this. And so this is obviously mixed case, but if I now run the application, let's see what happens. What you'll see is that everything is being done uppercase. And this is pretty much how dependency injection works. And so I am just, let me put this on the next line so you can have a better view. I am just specifying with constructor injection, I am just specifying any of those things that I have configured in the configure services, and the container will take care of passing in an instance. And whether it is the same or something else, a new instance, that depends on the life cycle of that service. That's pretty cool, huh? What I can now do, I was talking about, teams can work together or independently on parallel, and they can do whatever they want. They can build their building blocks together. So let's see how cool this actually is. Because if I would now go to the service that I've written here, I could obviously also create a lowercase service. I will do it quite easy. I will just paste it in here, and I will change this to lowercase. And in this case, I'll do it to lower. And right now, if we run the application, nothing will happen. Because I didn't change the registration, though I have put in the work for the service. But if I would now switch over the behavior by replacing services, you can imagine that I can go to the startup, and in this case I will change this one to lowercase, and if I now run the application, I am using another service, but my web page where I am using that service doesn't know that I've actually changed, in this case, the uppercase to lowercase. So you are decoupling certain portions of your application, as I mentioned at the start. To keep up with the slides, I always run ahead on my slides, but I do like to keep it in sync. So this is actually the first type of injection that we've done. There are some other injection methods as well. Suppose you have a service that does a tremendous amount of work, and it takes a bit of time to be, because what is actually happening now, let me get back to the code. As soon as you request this page, where was the page? This one. As soon as you request this page, this service will be passed in. But imagine that you have like a bunch of methods in this page model, and you only need that particular service on one spot. And it happens to be that this service does so much work that it will take like 5 seconds to initialize. I mean, to create the object, maybe get some data from here or there, and it takes a couple of seconds. It would be a bit of a shame to have that thing being injected here, since we only do something with it on this particular method, right? So for that, you can use another type of injection. So let's get this out of the way. I'll remove this one as well, and this can go as well. But what I'll do now is I'll pass in a parameter on this onGet. And now I can decorate this parameter what was it again? iString modifier surface. I call it my SVC to make it slightly different. So what I've done now is I have passed in the iString modifier surface as a parameter on this method. And I've decorated it with an attribute from surfaces. And so you can imagine what's happening now. If I would change this one over to this, it will do the same. And so this is another type of injection. So, and I mean, I keep saying that this to a whole bunch of people. You always need to consider where you want to inject it. It all depends on what it costs to initialize such an object. And so think about the implications if you would use the constructor injection, though constructor injection is the most used injection probably. But still, if you have a heavy service, don't do it there. But you might want to do it on the spot where you need it. Yeah, and this constructor injection that works in controllers, it works in tag helpers. In case you have some code with that, you can just have a tag helper, put a service as a parameter in the constructor, and you'll get it handed over. You can use it in view components, in MVC filters, and so on. Yeah, well, I just talked about the parameter injection as well. And there is another one which is called property injection, but I would be very careful with that because that takes a bit away of the advantages of dependency injection. And so be careful with the property injection, but the way that typically works is that I could go to my code. I'll remove this one. I'll comment it out. And what I can do now is, let me copy this one out. I can create a property, which I call like this. I do need to make it get and set to have it passed in. And I can decorate it with the inject. And this is something in some particular areas you need it. I'll show you a bit later on the Blazor. I'm going to show you some Blazor as well to see how it works. And there you will see that sometimes you need to use the inject, but now you can't unit test this anymore. While if you would use constructor injection or you would use parameter injection, you have better control on the code being tested and what's being injected there. So this is, use this carefully. I'll leave it in as a comment, but I'll put something right here as well. Be careful. All right, so that is the injection part. So let's now talk about something else. And that is, let me cheat on my sheet. Yeah. Razor view injection. Yeah, that is something that we're going to talk about now, but I'm not going to use Razor, but I'm going to talk about Blazor, obviously, because Blazor is super cool. And that also works with dependency injection. So for that, I have also set up a small application here, and let me see what I have put together. Yeah, this is a typical, this is a Blazor server application, but this also works very nice with Blazor WebAssembly. And the cool thing is that there are certain things in Blazor server which are slightly different as Blazor WebAssembly. And for that, if you set up your services correctly, you can actually have the same code or the same projects for Blazor WebAssembly and Blazor Server, but by replacing a number of services, you can change that behavior. An example is maybe on Blazor Server, you want to populate a data grid with a JSON file. Well, with Blazor Server, you can actually just request that file locally from the local file system. While with Blazor WebAssembly, you need to do a HTTP GET to get it. So if you would create a service for the server and server for the client, the UI will be the same code, but you can swap that around. Yeah, so that is why this is also very convenient with Blazor. Another thing with Blazor is that you can actually use this as state management in your client-side application. You obviously want to maintain some sort of state in any application. You want to know what your user was doing or what he's going to do. And so for this, let me set this one and start a project and show you a couple of nice tricks here. I am always looking for the start a project item. Yeah, and that's this one. Again, I have done a file new experience, so nothing exciting here, but I just want to show you a couple of things here on how to use dependency injection. And a typical example here is if I would go to this counter page, I hit click me, what we'll see is that this counter is increasing. So that's all very cool. But if I go to fetch data and I go back to counter, what you'll see is that the counter has been reset to 0. And I mean, there are some situations where you might want to keep track of that number. And with dependency injection, you can do that quite easy, actually. So the reason that this counter has been reset is also the way that this application works. And so if we would take a look at the pages here, and I go to the counter, for everybody who is unfamiliar with Blazor, this looks quite a bit like Razor pages, except that this code typically runs on the client. In this case, it's not entirely true, but I won't go too deep into that. And I can use binding. So what happens here is that I have a private variable current count that is being projected here. If that current count changes for whatever reason, it will be updated in the UI without refreshing, reloading whatsoever. That's the whole beautiful thing with Blazor. I also have a button here, and because of this add sign, the add on click, I am binding a method, in this case the increment count, and the increment count increases once you click it. But what is important that if I go to this page, you'll see that the current count has been reset explicitly to 0. So what can we do with dependency injection? Well, we can keep track of that current count. And so how does that work? Let's do a really quick service here. And this is also known as a state manager, basically. And I'm going to keep it simple, but it is just to give you an idea. I'm even going to put it right in the startup file. I'm going to create a class, which is my state manager. And the state manager, it doesn't need anything from me right now, so I can leave out the constructor. I'm going to create a property which I will call counter. And this is just an ordinary integer counter. I will next put a method in. Well, typically you should put in a method to change this counter. I will now do it simple because we need to keep track of time as well. So normally what you would do, well, you know what, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to say public int counter, and it will be a private or protected set. So you can't set it from the outside. I'm going to create a method, which I will call increment counter. And what does this do? Oh, I do have to make this obviously public, or it won't work. What I'll do is I'll say counter And the reason why you want to do this approach and not use the set property is so you've got a bit more control on when this counter will change. And you'll see in a minute why it is important to do it this way. There are other frameworks for state management as well. They're even more complex and even cooler, but this is just a simple one. I will also create an interface here. It is typically a good practice to use an interface for the type registration with dependency injection because you're a bit more flexible. I'll call this interface I state manager. And let me quickly implement it here. And now what I'll do is I can add it to the interface and this one as well. So I'm going again, and that's obviously beautiful with Blazor, Razor Pages, MVC, .NET Core, all the bells. It's all the same now because I have a configure services here. And I can say services, and now it's getting really interesting because what I'll do now is register. What did I do? I first do the transient one. I'll register the what was it again? State manager. Just like this. We've seen it, we've done this before. Now I will use another trick, and in this case I will use a typical Blazor feature here because what I'll do is, this is the wrong one actually. I will go to this index. No, I go to the counter page and I can say inject the I state manager, and I'm going to inject that as state. This is another injection method, but this comes with Razor Pages as well as Blazor. I'm sorry. And what I'll do now is this state will be injected right at the point where we need it. And now what I'll do is I can remove this and replace this by state.counter. Oh, yeah, this code completion is still a bit buggy every now and then. And the on click, I'm going to replace that as well by state increment counter. And with this, I can remove this code. I'll leave it in as commented out. So I don't need this anymore. But what's happening now is I will get that state from the container and it will still do the same. So if I run the application, what we'll see is something very, well, actually we don't see a thing because if I hit click me, it will still work. If I go to another page, it will still be 0. So that is obviously because the way that I've registered this service. And remember, I registered it as transient. So if I would now go to this same configure services and I would now make this scoped. And with Blazor server scoped means that this instance will be alive for this particular client. Another client will get another one. So this is typically, it's slightly different as from the regular DI. But what's happening now is that if I click that button a couple of times, I'll go to another page, I'll get back, it will still be 6. And the same if I go to this page, I go. And so now I have used the dependency injection as a state container. And that is obviously quite a convenient thing. Another thing is if I would open up another page, let me open another browser actually, because I'm going to open up a second instance of this particular app. So in this case, you already see that the current count is 0. You see that? And if I change this one and I change that one, it differs. Yeah, but now comes the tricky part, because this is Blazor Server, and that's also why I use Blazor Server for this. If I would now change this to a singleton, it's only too bad that I can't really communicate with you guys, because I was actually wondering if somebody could tell me what's going on now. I think I made a typo here. So now I have made it singleton. And what's happening now is I go to counter. I hit, I'll leave this like it is. I'll go to the other browser. And if I click this one, it's now on 5. And it continues here on 6. You see that? So if you register a Blazor server service as a singleton, it will be available for everybody. Yeah, and that's the whole difference between those life cycles. Yeah, and I think that with this, yeah, we are quite on our way to the end of this material. I hope that I've given you a very nice introduction on how you can do this. I can actually show you a bit of other code, which is on a project that I'm working on right now, to give you another idea on the dependency injection, but on a bigger scale, basically. And for that, I will drag in some code. And this is another Visual Studio instance. I'll make the code a bit bigger here. And this is quite a bit of code. What's in here? But what we'll see is, for instance, I have a control which renders a data grid with some bells and whistles. And what I'll do here is that I use dependency injection, and not on this particular control, but I am using, this is a Blazor application as well. I am using the inject, the property injection, because otherwise I can't have access to the IGS runtime in this Blazor application. I want to do a couple of things here, like window, app, focus, element, and stuff. And for that, I need in Blazor the GS runtime. And for this particular scenario, it's the easiest way to inject it. One of the other things that I'm using here, which is also interesting to mention, is that this application is based on an MVVM design pattern, and that means that there is a view model doing all the logic for the UI, and that's also keeping track of states in certain stages. So if I would go to one of those view models, then you'll I do have to check one of them, and in this case there is a view model like this. It does a whole bunch of things, but the interesting part here is that I am actually using constructor injection here to have all kinds of data services injected, which I can now use in this code. So I have something that retrieves persons in this case. I have another service which retrieves lookup data. And as soon as this view model is being constructed by the dependency injector, these services are passed in as well. I've registered them all in the configure services, and in this, this gives you a very easy way of getting access to those data items in this case. Well, there's a whole bunch of more dependency injection inside this application, but that would take a bit too long to go into that as well. But this is a typical example on how to work with the dependency injection, you see. And with this, I am pretty much done with my presentation here. And yeah, if there are any questions, please put them in the chat. I see a question here. How can we register things without the startup project? Yeah, that is actually it's a good question. Yeah, if you would check out other dependency injection frameworks, a lot of the times they're using some sort of a configuration file which allows you to dynamically register services basically. But yeah, what I've noticed with the direction Microsoft is going with certain things is that they would rather do it hard coded. So with the register, with the register services in the startup. And so you see that with a lot of things, they use a lot of dependency injection and a lot of generic code to hard code the registration of those services. And yeah, that means that if you want to add or replace something, you have to reboot the application. At the other end, it's a bit more secure from like a hacker perspective. There is, in case somebody can access your file because it's not properly protected on the web server, to give you an example, and they can change the line and inject their own stuff somehow. Yeah, you're pretty much screwed, and you can't. It's very difficult to see what is messing with your application. And so, yeah, in the last couple of years, Microsoft guys have changed the direction a bit more to strongly typed stuff to register that stuff more. I guess as a security measure as well. So, yeah. Well, if there are any other questions, yeah, please put them in the chat box, and as soon as I will see them popping up in my Q&A section, I'll answer it.